It's the quarterfinals of the World Cup, and I'm going to look at the game between Domaraju Gukesh and Magnus Carlsen. Well, earlier in the tournament, Carlsen had said that he was bored with classical chess, and when he was sitting at the board, he just didn't know what he was doing there. Could he find the motivation to play against the 17-year-old star from India, Gukesh, who is now in the top 10 in the world? Gukesh had white, d4, and he played a London system. Very interesting. So not going for any mainline opening. And Carlsen also didn't play, you could say, one of the standard methods of meeting the London system. b6, of course, there's nothing wrong with this. The bishop comes to the long diagonal, and it's a good diagonal. And knight c3, so now we've transposed into a kind of Jabava London system. So that's an interesting turn of events. e4 impossible, so therefore f3. And Carlsen doesn't play d5, but allows white to play e4. Well, this doesn't look bad for white. Nice centre, so black has to hit out somehow. And Carlsen plays a6 now. As many of the regular viewers of the channel know, when I see these little pawn moves at the side of the board, I start to wag my finger and I say, there is a special place in hell reserved for players who make these little pawn moves at the side of the board, neglecting their development. Now, the number one player in the world, Magnus Carlsen, is playing this, so it can't be that bad. But I would still say, do not try this at home. So why is Carlsen playing a6? Well, he wants to play d5 and perhaps induce white to push this pawn and then get a kind of French defense position. But I think he must have been a little concerned about knight b5 attacking here, which puts the knight to not a very good square on a6. And then white can close the position. And this is, it's playable for black. But the thing is, in positions like this, does black really want to go for this kind of position? Probably not. It's very unclear, but I'm sure Carlsen didn't want to give up this nice bishop. So that's why he played a6, I believe. He wants to rule out this move. But it's a waste of time, neglects development. And Gukesh plays queen d2, preparing to castle queenside. And after d5, well, instead of pushing on or taking, he plays boldly. He castles queenside, sacrificing a pawn. If Carlsen takes, well, he might well regret spending time with another pawn move, because white certainly has pretty good compensation in its position. Very easy development. These pieces can come out quickly. And you can see, well, most of black's pieces are at home. That's a very dangerous position to be in. Something like that, with the queen pointing in these directions. So Carlsen thought for a little bit, 9 minutes, and played bishop b4. Interesting. So it's a curious hybrid between several different known openings. A little bit like a winnower. You know, black is trying to induce white into pushing this pawn. But I understand why Gukesh didn't want to do this. Because in this position, you want to be able to force through f4, f5. I don't know about f6, but f4, f5 very quickly. In the meantime, black is able to expand with c5 quite easily, particularly as there's a pawn on a6. So I can understand why Gukesh decided after a 22-minute think just to play a3. And Carlsen exchanged off and took a pawn. So looks like a pawn sacrifice. So what's the big idea? Well, Carlsen didn't want to do this because didn't want to take the pawn. Well, Gukesh rather didn't want to take this pawn because I think black has very good compensation here. Look, you can see that white's development has been neglected while white has gone on this pawn, this spending spree, grabbing a pawn. Gukesh played d5. I really like this idea. So you can see there are 4 pieces that can or can legally take that pawn. Some not so good, taking the queen, not so clever. This is very interesting. You know, pawn takes pawn. Well, in this case, bishop takes pawn might be possible. Could also be possible to take here. Carlsen very quickly went for knight takes. And this is a forcing continuation. Queen takes pawn. Now you don't want to move the rook. This looks dreadful. But queen f6. So this basically forces an exchange of queens. And now, clever idea. You could take this pawn immediately, but instead Gukesh plays bishop e5, dragging the king up to e7. Of course, knight d7 falls into that one. So king e7 protects the knight, and then bishop takes pawn. Thing is, with the king on a dart square, it's vulnerable to a check here and elsewhere. Knight d7. So Carlsen has pretty good coordination. And white's pieces don't look too clever on the king side. But it is possible to check the king back. This is one way of playing. And then even sacrifice a pawn. Something like this. And this bishop is a real monster on d6. That's one way of playing. Gukesh played something very interesting. Bishop g3 with the idea of bishop h4 and attacking the king from that direction. So it was worth just dragging the king up the board. So rook g8, nice move from Carlsen. That's just targeting that g2 pawn. And here I think bishop h4 was the right move. So there's going to be a threat to take here. King steps back. And for example, after this, knight f3, and well, it's a very double-edged position. The king could be safe here, but the rooks are split. I mean, black's pieces are quite nice, but I do like that lovely bishop on h4. Very double-edged. But Gukesh played bishop e2, which does look a bit funny. And I mean, I understand what he's trying to do. He's, you know, he's trying to bring the bishop into play and the knight potentially quickly. But Carlsen's next move was excellent. King e8. And the point is that there's going to be no sly check from h4 or d6. That's a little bit hard for white to untangle here. Gukesh took on e4 and played bishop f3. Now, in playing like this, and frankly there isn't much better, this is saying I haven't got any advantage because Carlsen can simplify straight away. Once this dart squared bishop goes, then Gukesh has no chance for the advantage. That was what he was playing on. So white can take here. It doesn't make much difference actually. After bishop takes, rook here. This is, to be honest, it's similar to the game. Gukesh instead took on g3, bishop takes, knight takes. So we've got a simplification. It's, let me see, 4 pawns each. This one is a bit risky. Knight e5 is a very strong move. Knight takes allows rook h8 with a nice skewer. So Carlsen, just for a moment, has to defend against that threat and bounces up with the king. But that king is now looking really snug on e7. There's no nasty bishop checking from the side. It has the protection of these pawns and the knight. And this is better for black, there's no doubt about it. Now, if you feed this position into a computer, you'll see that it says the position is just about equal. But to my eyes, black is better here. And it's to do with the structure. It's to do with the fact that black has this extra centre pawn which shields the king, and there is potential to queen the e-pawn. This is a weak pawn as well. Problem is that white's queenside majority is just on its starting blocks. It's going to be very, very difficult to create a passed pawn. So basically, white is going to be on the defensive here. Let's see how this played out. Knight d4. So this is an attempt to just kind of complicate the situation. You know, perhaps the king can be hassled. Knight e5 stops knight c6 check. Rook e1, well, be careful. Got to watch out for a stray knight fork on f5 if the knight moves. And it's an interesting moment. Carlsen could keep the knights on the board with king f6. And the rook would move back to one of these squares to hassle the king. So, but reasonable way of playing. But Carlsen simplifies. So attacks the knight. So rook takes, rook takes. Now, I think defensively this seems like white has achieved something. Often rook and pawn endgames have more drawing tendencies than, say, a rook and knight endgame. But let's see what happened. Basically, Carlsen still has this structural advantage. These beautiful pawns, which protect the king and threaten to advance. I've had this position so many times, similar positions, from different openings, from the Sicilian, where you often have a central pawn majority, from the French defence, from the Caro-Kann, for example. And they're difficult for the defender. So Gukesh brought the rook back. Rook d8 with a threat. c3 and rook f4. So Carlsen is very active with the rooks. King c2 and now rook g8. So he's starting to put pressure on this pawn. The time isn't ripe yet to advance those pawns. First job is to tie white to defending this pawn. And it's already difficult. Should white bring the king over to try to defend, or should you try and create a passed pawn? Gukesh goes for the latter. Wants to try and create counterplay on the queen side. Very understandable. You don't want to defend passively. But b5 makes it more difficult to create that passed pawn. King b3. Gukesh is trying anyway. Rook g4 hits the pawn. If white defends passively here, that looks grim. You know, these rooks are tied to defending that pawn, and then it's going to be easier for black to advance these pawns slowly but surely. f5, king f6, and so on. So rook f2 instead attacks the pawn, which forces the rook to interpose, and an exchange of rooks. So again, that simplifies matters. So you would think that for the defender that's somehow improved matters. But basically everything still applies that I've mentioned before. That passed e-pawn. The fact that black's king can support the pawns very easily. And the rook is still tied here. Again, if you look at this with a computer, it'll say that white is doing okay, but it's not easy. a4 looks reasonable. You want to try and weaken this pawn. f5, Magnus was now playing with great speed. His plan is clear. Bring the king up to support the pawns and push them down the board. Takes on b5. And Gukesh played rook a2. Looks entirely reasonable to try and create some counterplay. Well, my computer likes c4. So this is the big question. Is this possible? Well, Gukesh must have been worried by rook g3 check. Of course, if black exchanges, that's exactly what white wants. White has counterplay, and that's actually a pretty easy draw. The question is, what happens on rook g3 check? Now, this is very, very difficult to assess during a game. If the king steps back, then the pawn gets taken, so the rook has to interpose. So then exchange pawns, and black takes this pawn. So black now has connected past pawns. The computer says this is equal. Well, good luck with that if you're trying to play this with white. This is still very, very difficult to defend, and you have to be accurate the whole way. Black's task is simple, push the pawns. For white, it's not so easy. Very easy to go wrong. So I can understand why Gukesh avoided that. So he went rook a2. And Carlsen played an inaccuracy now. Again, this is by very high computer standards. So the computer recommends king d6 and thinks that black is doing extremely well, just with pushing these pawns. And the point is that this king can actually come across to defend that pawn. But instead, Carlsen went rook g5. So his idea was to support the b pawn with f4. Now, Gukesh did not go for this. This still looks absolutely terrifying to me. It's kind of amazing that white can hold this. I'm going to play through a long computer line. I mean, I was sort of flicking around with the computer, and it seemed to think that this was possible. I mean, white is behind in the race, so this looks absolutely disastrous for white. But have a look at this. Okay, I'm just going to flick through very, very quickly. Now, maybe there's a mistake in this. If the pawns are exchanged here, then that should be okay for white. Okay, what happens after this? Have a look. In fact, white draws by one tempo. If it's black to play here, black wins. But as it's white to play, c7, a bishop's pawn, that's a theoretical draw. So you could explore that if you want to. But those kind of variations are impossible to calculate at the board. You have to go by judgment. And that certainly looked winning for black, but the computer says it isn't. Gukesh checked instead. And the rook came back. And then the pawn started rolling. And now it really is lost. There's really nothing that white can do against this. Yes, he's taken that pawn, but it is way too slow. The e-pawn is now too far gone. And after e2, Gukesh resigned. So why did he resign? If that pawn is pushed, you don't make a queen because of the skewer, but instead you go rook e3 and then you make a queen. And if the rook checks, let's have a look. b5, again rook e3, and you make a queen. And if the rook checks, let's have a look at this. You make a queen. You take that one, you push that one, and the rook stops the b pawn, and that one goes through. So after e2, this really was the moment to resign. What a superb technical performance from Magnus Carlsen. You know, he took big decisions very quickly. One of those big decisions was way back here when he decided to go into the rook and pawn endgame. He could have kept the knights on, but it would have still been quite complicated. The computer prefers this way, but instead he played in the human way, ensuring that he reached this endgame, which still gives excellent winning chances. And he was proved absolutely right. At the crucial moment, Gukesh failed to defend accurately. So Carlsen goes one up in their mini-match. That means in the next game, Gukesh must win to tie the match. What happened in the other quarterfinals? Well, when I started recording, there were 2 games still going on. We had Eric Geisty had beaten Prague. And let me see, Caruana was about to draw with Dominguez, and Vidit was probably drawing against Abbasov, but still some way to go there. Well, it's been a fascinating World Cup. As I said in the last video, I've been away on holiday. That's why I haven't been covering it. So bear with me while I'm catching up with everything. I do really enjoy this tournament. And I want to say thank you to all the followers of ChessBase India who have subscribed to the channel today and have brought the subs for PowerPlayChess over 100,000. Thank you very much to all of you. Really appreciate that. And of course to Sagar Shah and Amruta and his wife Amruta, who had me on the commentary today. Really appreciated and always great fun to do that. Right, folks, more chess coming tomorrow. Thanks for watching.